This is the Eternal Record Bible, dictated by Yeshua HaMashiac, transcribed by Heaven's 12th General. The Book of 4th Maccabees. Preface. This book is a crown of testimony, declaring the triumph of reason, faith, and godly devotion over the passions of the flesh and the terrors of death. It shows how the law of God, written upon the heart, strengthens the righteous to endure unspeakable torments with courage and steadfastness. Here is revealed that true freedom is not in the flesh, but in the mastery of the Spirit over the body. For those who love the Lord are made stronger than fire, sharper than swords, and greater than kings. In this scroll, the mother and her 7 sons are remembered again, not only for their suffering, but as examples of the power of holy reason strengthened by the Spirit. Their witness shines as a lamp for every generation, declaring that faith in the living God conquers all fear, and that the hope of resurrection is greater than the threats of tyrants. Eleazar also is honored, whose noble death displayed that even in old age, the heart can be unshaken when it rests in the law of the Lord. 4th Maccabees is not merely history, but exhortation. It teaches that the passions of anger, fear, lust, and pain are subject to the mind that is governed by the fear of God. It reveals that the death of the righteous is never in vain, but becomes a ransom for the nation and a testimony against the oppressor. This book was preserved to strengthen the remnant in every generation, that they may know the victory of faith, that they may endure trial with patience, and that they may overcome by fixing their eyes on the eternal crown. For he that rules his spirit is greater than he that takes a city, and he that fears God shall not fear death. Yeshua HaMashiac. Chapter 1. Reason is supreme over the passions, for it is right to declare that a mind governed by the law of God rules all desires and fears. For temperance, courage, justice, and wisdom are the 4 virtues, and these are guided by reason, which is the mind choosing what is right according to the law. But the passions are contrary, being anger, fear, lust, and pain, which draw men away from virtue if they are not restrained. Yet reason, armed with the fear of God, is stronger than all these, for it teaches men not to be overcome by pleasures, nor to be moved by threats, nor to be enslaved by desires. For what is temperance but mastery over pleasures? What is courage but mastery over fears? What is justice but mastery over passions? What is wisdom but the knowledge of the law of God that directs all things? Therefore it is plain that reason is the ruler of the passions, not by its own strength, but because it is instructed by the law of the Most High. For the law teaches us not to transgress, to keep ourselves pure, to honor God, and to love righteousness above life itself. And reason, remembering these commandments, subdues the passions. For it is not more natural to yield to desires than to overcome them. Some may say that reason is not master over the passions, but only serves them. Yet let us consider the examples of our fathers, and see whether reason is not stronger than fear, pain, and death itself. For many have endured cruel torments, not for weakness, but because their minds were steadfast in the law. Therefore, reason is not hindered by pain, nor overcome by pleasure, but stands firm when it is established upon the commandments of God. It is this power of reason that we now set forth, declaring how the holy men, by their devotion, subdued the passions and overcame torment, leaving behind for all generations a noble testimony. Chapter 2. For reason is a guide to virtue, teaching us to control both the impulses of the body and the emotions of the soul. It is not that the law abolishes the passions altogether, but that it teaches us how to govern them, so that desire may be bridled, fear restrained, anger tempered, and pain endured with courage. For the law saith, Thou shalt not covet, thereby restraining desire. It saith also, Thou shalt not fear them that kill the body, thereby strengthening the heart against terror. It commandeth, Thou shalt not avenge thyself, thereby ruling anger. And it teacheth patience in affliction, thereby overcoming pain. Thus the law formeth reason into a master over the passions, not destroying their existence, but bringing them into subjection. For even as a charioteer controls the horses with reins, so doth reason, instructed by the law, hold in check the stirrings of the flesh. But if a man yield to his passions, he becometh like a ship without a helm, driven by the waves of desire and tossed by every wind. Yet he that is governed by reason is like a city walled and defended, whose gates are kept with diligence, and no enemy breaketh through. Consider, therefore, how great is the power of reason, that it can stand against torments and overcome even the fear of death. For our fathers, being taught in the law, despised the threats of tyrants and endured cruel punishments, counting it better to die in righteousness than to live in wickedness. And this is the proof that reason is Lord over the passions, that men and women alike, both young and old, for the sake of virtue and the law, chose rather to suffer than to transgress. Chapter 3. Let us now consider the example of our father Eleazar, a man of priestly dignity, well advanced in years, and noble in appearance, whose life was adorned with every virtue. When the tyrant sought to compel him to eat unlawful flesh, Eleazar chose rather a glorious death than a life stained with transgression. For though they urged him with many words, and though his age might have pleaded for indulgence, yet he despised their entreaties, for his reason, strengthened by the law, held mastery over fear and pain. They brought him to the instruments of torture, stretching out his body, smiting him with scourges, and seeking to break his steadfastness. But he groaned, not for the anguish of the body, nor cried out as one overcome, but declared boldly that it is better to die in righteousness than to live in defilement. His reason, armed with the law, subdued the pain, for he set before his eyes the reward laid up for the faithful, and the judgment prepared for the transgressors. So he yielded up his life willingly, leaving behind a testimony that reason is stronger than torment, and that the fear of God is greater than the fear of death. By his death, he not only preserved his own soul undefiled, but also strengthened the hearts of the young, teaching them that it is possible, by holy reason, to overcome every passion and endure every affliction. Therefore, Eleazar is remembered among the righteous, and his death is honored as a victory of virtue, a crown of faith, and a witness for all generations. Chapter 4. The story of the 7 brethren who endured together with their mother is yet more noble and wonderful, for in them reason was shown to be victorious not only over pain, but over natural affection. For when the tyrant commanded them to eat unlawful meats or be tormented, they with one voice declared that they would rather die than transgress the holy law. Then were they scourged and racked, their limbs torn, and their bodies mangled. Yet their minds stood unshaken, for reason, strengthened by the fear of God, ruled over the anguish of their flesh. Each one, as he came to his turn, exhorted his brethren not to faint, but to be strong, saying that the Lord of all seeth, and will reward the faithful with life everlasting. Their mother also, though pierced with sorrow in her heart, encouraged them all, esteeming the pains of her children lighter than the dishonor of breaking the law. She counted it better to see them slain in righteousness than to see them living in wickedness. For her reason, guided by faith, prevailed over her tender love. Thus, both the young men and their mother became a spectacle to the whole nation, showing forth that reason sanctified by the law is unconquerable, and that godliness is stronger than torment. And their deaths were not in vain, for by them the nation was preserved, the tyrant was put to shame, and the covenant of God was magnified before all. These things being so, it is plain that reason is supreme over the passions, for even natural affection, the strongest of all, was subject to the fear of God. Chapter 5. The tyrant, seeing the steadfastness of the brethren, was filled with great wrath, and commanded that the instruments of torture should be brought forth. And he said to them, Yield to my command and eat of the flesh, for this is but a small thing, and you shall save your lives. But they answered with one voice, We will not transgress the law of our fathers, for it is better for us to die than to live in sin before God. Then he raged exceedingly, and commanded the fire to be kindled, and the wheels to be made ready. And he said to the eldest, Wilt thou eat and be spared? Or wilt thou be tormented with grievous pains? But he answered with a loud voice, We will not forsake the law of our fathers, for God is witness, and he will deliver us out of thy hands. So they bound him upon the wheel, and tore his limbs with iron claws, and the smoke of his burning flesh went up. Yet he cried aloud, The pain is nothing compared with the joy that shall be revealed. When he was dead, the second was brought, and he likewise endured torment, confessing the Lord with boldness. The third also was mocked, scourged, and slain, holding fast his faith without wavering. Thus, one after another, they were destroyed. Yet every one of them declared with their last breath that reason, guided by the law, is unconquerable, and that the fear of God is stronger than the fear of death. And the tyrant marveled, though in his rage he ceased not, for he saw that his threats and torments were overcome by the steadfastness of their minds. Chapter 6. Let us now declare more fully the torment of the first brother, that it may be plain how reason guided by the law is stronger than pain. For when they had stripped him and bound him to the wheel, they tore his sides with iron claws, while they scorched him with fire. And though his body was consumed with anguish, his mind remained unshaken, for he set before his eyes the covenant of the fathers and the hope of the resurrection. He cried aloud, O accursed tyrant! Thou takest from us this present life, but the King of the world shall raise us up unto everlasting life, for we die in his laws. And while he spoke thus, his flesh was mangled, his bones broken, and his bowels spilled out. Yet he fainted not in his faith. The fire licked his wounds, the wheels tore his limbs. Yet his soul triumphed over the torment, for his reason was fixed upon God. At last, giving up the ghost, he left his body as a testimony. But his spirit was received into glory, and his death became a crown of victory. Thus the first of the brethren showed forth that reason, armed with the fear of God, is unconquerable, and that the righteous, though slain, are not forsaken. For his death strengthened the rest, that they might endure the same torments with greater boldness, knowing that their brother had overcome by faith. Chapter 7. The second of the brethren was then brought forth to torment, and the tyrant sought with many words to persuade him, saying, Yield to me, and save thy life. But he answered boldly, We are ready to die, rather than to transgress the holy laws of our fathers. So they tore the skin from his head with the hair, and asked him if he would eat before his body was destroyed. But he said, No, I will not. Wherefore they tormented him even as they had done the first. And when his body was mangled, and he drew near to death, he lifted his voice and said, Thou, O wretch, takest us out of this present life. But the King of the world shall raise us up, who die for his laws, unto everlasting life. Thus he departed, leaving behind a testimony of courage, for he counted the sufferings of this time not worthy to be compared with the glory to come. And his reason, strengthened by the law, triumphed over pain. For though his body was consumed, his soul was steadfast in the fear of God. So the second also obtained the crown of victory, and his death became an encouragement to his brethren to endure steadfastly. Chapter 8. The third of the brethren was brought forth, and when they had demanded of him to eat, he quickly put out his tongue, and stretched forth his hands with courage. And he said, From heaven I received these, and for his laws I despise them, and from him I hope to receive them again. So they marveled at the young man's boldness, that he regarded not the pains, nor begged for mercy, but offered himself willingly to torment. Then they cut off his hands and feet, and though his body was mutilated, his reason remained unconquered, for he fixed his hope upon God. With his last breath he declared, Better it is to lose limbs for the sake of the law, than to lose the soul for transgression, for God will restore all things in the resurrection. Thus he died with a joyful courage, his body consumed in torment, but his spirit crowned with victory. And his death was a light to his brethren, that they should not faint, for they saw that the law of God is stronger than the terror of men. Therefore the third also obtained a noble testimony, showing that reason, sanctified by faith, is more powerful than all pain. Chapter 9. The fourth of the brethren was brought forth, and the tyrant thought to weaken his heart by multiplying torments more than upon the others. They stretched him upon the wheel, they tore his flesh with whips, they scorched him with fire, and they poured boiling liquids upon his wounds. Yet he endured all steadfastly, for his reason, established in the law, triumphed over the anguish of the body. And he lifted up his voice and said, It is good, being put to death by men, to look for hope from God to be raised up again by him. But as for thee, O tyrant, thou shalt have no resurrection to life, for thou fightest against the Lord of heaven. Then his tormentors, enraged by his words, increased their cruelty. But he regarded not the pain, for he looked to the promise of God. So he departed, leaving behind a testimony that death in righteousness is better than life in wickedness, and that reason is stronger than torment. His courage strengthened the hearts of the rest, for they saw that the law of God giveth power to overcome all fear. Chapter 10. The fifth of the brethren was then brought forth, and the tyrant thought by flatteries as well as by torments to overcome him. He promised him riches and honor if he would forsake the law of his fathers, but if not, he threatened him with destruction. But he answered boldly, We will not forsake the law of our fathers, neither for riches nor for life itself, for we esteem the commandments of God above all things. Then the tormentors stretched him upon the instruments and scourged him with rods, while the king looked on with cruelty. But he lifted up his voice and said, Thou hast power over men, O king, because thou art mortal. But think not that our nation is forsaken of God. For abide a while, and thou shalt see his great power, how he will torment thee and thy seed. And though his flesh was torn, and his body mangled, yet his soul was established in reason, for he counted the pains of this life as nothing, compared with the hope laid up for the righteous. So the fifth also departed, obtaining the crown of victory, and his death became another testimony that reason, guided by the fear of God, is unconquerable. Chapter 11. The sixth of the brethren was brought forth, a young man strong in body and of a courageous spirit. The tyrant said unto him, Yield to me, and thou shalt be spared from torment, but if not, thou shalt be destroyed with grievous pains. But he answered, Be not deceived without cause, for we suffered these things because of our sins against our God. Yet think not that thou shalt escape unpunished, who strivest against the Lord of heaven. So they tormented him with scourges, they burned his flesh with fire, they pierced him with spits. Yet he fainted not, but cried aloud, The Lord seeth, and he will judge thee, O enemy of God. for thou slayest the righteous without cause. And though his body was consumed, his soul triumphed, for his reason, instructed by the law, ruled over the torments. So he departed, leaving behind a testimony that the righteous may suffer, but they are never forsaken, for God will raise them up in glory. Chapter 12. Last of all, the seventh, the youngest of the brethren, was brought forth, and the tyrant sought by promises and threats to turn him from the law. He said, Thou art young, and mayest yet enjoy many years if thou wilt but obey me. But if not, thou shalt die before thy time. But the young man answered, I will not obey the commandment of the king, but I will obey the commandment of the law, which was given unto our fathers by Moses. Thou that hast devised mischief against the Hebrews shall not escape the judgment of Almighty God. For we suffer these things for a little while because of our sins, but the Lord shall be at one again with his servants. But thou, O tyrant, most wicked of all men, be not lifted up without cause, nor puffed up with vain hopes. For thou hast not yet escaped the judgment of the Almighty, who seeth all things. My brethren who now are dead have suffered a short pain, and are under God's covenant of everlasting life. But thou, through the judgment of God, shall receive just punishment for thy pride. And I, like my brethren, offer up my body and my life for the laws of our fathers, beseeching God that he would speedily be merciful unto our nation, and that thou, by plagues and torments, mayest confess that he alone is God. With these words, the young man gave up the ghost, despising the threats of the tyrant, for his reason triumphed over pain and death. Thus all 7 brethren died in like manner, being made perfect through suffering, and they left behind a testimony unto all generations, that reason, sanctified by the fear of God, is unconquerable. Chapter 13. Let us now praise the mother, who was found faithful above all, for she saw her 7 sons tormented and slain in one day, yet fainted not in her courage. For reason, strengthened by faith, ruled over her natural affection, and she esteemed the honor of God greater than the preservation of her children. She encouraged every one of them with steadfast words, saying, Fear not this tormentor, but remember the covenant of the fathers, for the Lord will receive you into everlasting life. Her soul was pierced with sorrow, yet she counted the suffering of her children lighter than the dishonor of transgression. She beheld them, mangled with scourges and consumed with fire, yet she stood firm, for she trusted in the promises of God. Oh, marvelous was her faith, that a woman, weak by nature, was made strong to endure by reason of the law. She despised the threats of the tyrant. She laughed him to scorn. She triumphed in the midst of anguish, for her heart was fixed upon the Lord. Therefore she is blessed forever, and her memory shall not perish, for she became an example of courage to men and women, young and old, teaching that the fear of God is stronger than all passions. Her death was with glory, for she gave up her life together with her children, and her soul was received into rest with the righteous. Chapter 14. Let us now consider how great was the power of faith and reason in these martyrs, that they not only endured torment themselves, but became a ransom for the whole nation. For the tyrant was put to shame, and the wrath of God that was justly upon the people was turned away through their sufferings. The nation was preserved, the law was magnified, and the covenant was established because of their steadfastness unto death. And though the tyrant accused them as rebels, yet their deaths declared them to be the true defenders of the law, and their blood spake better things than the accusations of the ungodly. For by their endurance the people were delivered, and by their sacrifice the enemies were confounded. Thus it is plain that the righteous suffer not in vain, but their torments become a testimony, and their deaths an atonement for the nation. For even as a shield wardeth off the blow, so did their blood turn away the wrath of the Almighty, and their souls entered into everlasting glory. Therefore their memory is blessed, for they became not only witnesses of virtue, but also intercessors for their people, standing before the throne of God. Chapter 15. Now let these examples be an exhortation unto all men, that we should not faint in the day of trial, but hold fast the fear of God, which is stronger than death. For if children, youths, and even a mother endured such torments with steadfast reason, how much more ought we, who know their testimony, to be encouraged? Let us not yield to passions, whether of pleasure, fear, or pain, but let us bring them into subjection by holy reason, governed by the law. For it is not the strength of the body that gives victory, but the steadfastness of the mind fixed upon the commandments of God. They that love righteousness shall not be moved, though fire consume them and sword devour them, for their hope is in the Lord, who raiseth the dead. Therefore let every man take courage from these martyrs, and let their deaths be as a lamp to guide our steps in the way of virtue. For they overcame by faith, and their witness is laid up in heaven, that all generations might know that reason, sanctified by the law, is unconquerable. Let us therefore also strive for holiness, that we may be found worthy of the same crown, and be joined with them in everlasting glory. Chapter 16. The endurance of the righteous is the highest proof that reason ruleth over the passions. For though fire burn and iron tear, the mind that is fixed upon God is not moved. For the 7 brethren and their mother were not overcome by torments, but by reason they despised pains and counted death lighter than transgression. Consider how each one in his turn gave his body to stripes and wounds, yet not one of them forsook the law of their fathers. Their courage was not of flesh, but of faith. For they looked not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen, eternal in the heavens. Therefore their torment became their triumph, and their death became their crown, for they gained life everlasting through suffering. O noble mother, who endured beyond nature, for reason conquered her affection, and made her steadfast even unto death, that she might see her sons victorious over the tyrant. Their lives were offered as a sacrifice well-pleasing, and their deaths became a song of praise, declaring to all that godliness is stronger than fear. Thus it is shown that holy reason, armed with the law, is unconquerable, and that the righteous shall shine forever as the stars in the firmament. Chapter 17. Blessed are they who for the sake of God's law endure torment, for their memory shall never perish, and their names are written in the book of life. The nation was preserved through their sufferings, and the covenant was upheld by their deaths. The tyrant was confounded, his cruelty brought to nothing, and the power of God was magnified in the steadfastness of the martyrs. Their blood became a purification for the people, and their sacrifice a ransom for the nation. The wrath of God that was upon Israel was turned away, and the adversary was overthrown through their endurance. The people beheld their courage and were strengthened, learning that reason, sanctified by faith, is mightier than fire, than sword, and than all the devices of men. Their mother also is blessed forever, for she saw 7 sons die in one day, for the sake of the law, yet her heart was not moved from the fear of God. She shared in their victory, for though she suffered with them in anguish, she triumphed with them in glory. Therefore the righteous shall rejoice with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their seed shall inherit the promises, for God is faithful who hath called them. And their testimony shall endure until the end of the world, for they became as lights shining in darkness, guiding many unto righteousness. Chapter 18. O Israel, blessed art thou, for the sons of thy nation have borne witness unto the whole world, that reason, governed by the law, is unconquerable. For 7 brethren and their mother despised torments, overcame the tyrant, and obtained everlasting life. Their faith was stronger than fire, their courage greater than the sword, their hope higher than death itself. They loved not their lives unto death, but counted it gain to die for the commandments of God. The mother of them all is to be praised beyond measure, for though she saw her children destroyed before her eyes, she fainted not, but trusted in the promises of the Almighty. She strengthened them with holy words. She encouraged them with steadfast faith. She despised the threats of the tyrant, and she rejoiced in their victory, even in the midst of sorrow. Her death was joined with theirs, and her soul gathered into rest with her children, and her memory is eternal. These all, having overcome through faith, are crowned with immortality. Their place is with the righteous, and their glory is with the saints forevermore. Therefore let every man that readeth these things be exhorted to hold fast the fear of God and the mastery of reason over the passions, that he may also obtain a portion in their glory. For the Lord is faithful, who hath promised, and he will raise up the righteous in the day of his power, and they shall shine as the stars forever and ever.